after the resumption of fracking was announced in Parliament, Energy Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg faced heavy criticism from some Conservative MPs. This included Ruth Edwards, Conservative MP for Rushcliffe Council, and Ruth is with us now. Good afternoon, Ruth. What are your thoughts on the lifting of the ban?
Hi, Aaron. Thank you very much for having me on. Well, I think my thoughts are that people have many concerns about fracking. We've just heard Pauline talking about them there, and that it's really important that communities have a meaningful say on whether or not they want to accept fracking in their local area. And this is what the Prime Minister promised us during her leadership campaign. So what I was asking Jacob Rees-Mogg today, and what lots of other colleagues were asking him too, was how is this community consent going to be defined and how's it going to be measured? Because it's really important that communities know how they can object and what the threshold of objection will be in order to stop fracking. Now, it might be that a community wants to have a fracking well, but that it's really important that people get to either register their support or dissent from that, and that people have a meaningful say over what happens in their local area.
Well, you mentioned local area there, Ruth, and just there's going to be listeners out there going, what does this really mean for me? So what does it mean for the people of Nottinghamshire? Well, that is a very good question, because we have not yet had any clarity from Jacob Rees-Mogg or from the government ministers on what will count as the local community if there is a fracking licence being sought, and what sort of level of how they can register whether or not they would like to have fracking in their area if a licence is being sought in their area, and at what point the government would say, well, okay, it's clear that there isn't support for this particular application, so it's not going to go ahead. All that at the moment is unknown, and that's the detail that we've been pressing for today in Parliament. So, Ruth, if people want to have their say, how can they have their say?
Again, I can't tell you. That's what I was asking Jacob Rees-Mogg today. It's what many other colleagues were asking Jacob, and it's what I expect the government to come out and announce. I'm sure they will. The Prime Minister has promised, as I said, that fracking would only be brought forward with community support. So they now need to give us some very clear answers as to what that constitutes, because at the moment I have no further detail to give you.
Just finally, Ruth, and I have to ask this question, I want to. Your colleague Mark Fletcher accused the government of buying communities off to allow fracking. Is this what's happening?
Well, the one thing that Jacob Rees-Mogg did mention is that obviously, companies wanting to drill in a local area should be able to offer incentives to that local community. Now, I have no objection to that, but again, that isn't a mechanism by which you can judge whether or not the community consent to fracking in their area. So, of course, they can develop, packages that might make communities say, OK, we want to have a fracking well on site, but we still need a formal way for communities to decide that.
Thank you, Ruth, for joining us this afternoon. That was Ruth Edwards, Conservative MP for Rushcliffe Council.